Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. Thank you so much for joining us for the webinar today, brought to you, of course, by Pendo and Bandwidth. 5 ways data can improve your backlog management. This is Michael Peach, Head of Product Marketing here at Pendo. Just cover a quick few housekeeping items before we get started. First off, just so everyone knows, we are recording this webinar. We will share it with all of the attendees afterwards. Secondly, we really want this to be an interactive session. So you will see in your Zoom webinar window a little option for Q&A. As our presenters are talking this afternoon, anytime you have a question, please feel free to enter it in the box. We will take time afterwards to answer as many of them as we can. So with that, let's get started. Just a quick note on the agenda. We'll cover some introductions of each of our speakers. Then we'll spend a few minutes talking about how to use data to prioritize your backlog, and then specifically, secondly, how to tame your backlog. So lots of great information in the session, and then, as I said, obviously afterwards, we'll spend some time on Q&A. So again, anytime you have a question, feel free to log it in. It won't kick you out of the webinar or anything. And we will answer all the questions as we get to the end. So again, really excited today to be joined by two wonderful speakers. From Pendo, we have Julie Harrow, one of our product managers, and joining us, special guest, and actually physical special guest in the room with us for a change, Jeff Smith, who does user and developer experience at Bandwidth. So thank you both for joining us. Really excited for the session today. Just a little bit more background about Julie. Julie is a product manager here who is somewhat new to the software industry and also somewhat new to the South. She grew up in the Northeast, got an engineering degree from MIT, and worked as a technical consultant for a while, and also as technical account manager at Pendo before joining our product management team. So very excited to have Julie with us. And then Jeff is actually a cognitive psychologist by training, but now spends a lot of time working in user design research and user testing, really focusing on the intersection of people and products. He is also a big fan of shelter dogs. So fantastic. Thanks so much, both of you, for coming today. So we'll start by digging in a little bit into what are some best ways that you can use data to prioritize your backlog as a product manager. With that, let me hand it over to Julie.
Great, thanks, Michael. So I'm going to kick this off with a Dilbert strip. So the joke in this strip is really that having valuable information doesn't always matter because management won't use it for decision making anyway. Unfortunately, this discussion can be relevant for a lot of product managers, as PMs today don't always use as much data as they should, especially when it comes to feature prioritization. The #1 challenge that product managers report is not knowing if they're building the right things. But there are really some easily available data sources that product managers can take advantage of, not just when they're building new products, but also when they're working on feature backlogs of existing products. Think for a second about how you'd go about building a new product. Obviously, you'd really never do that without using some form of data. And sure, there's people like Steve Jobs or Jack Dorsey who seem almost clairvoyant in the way that they build products, but even they looked at some information. Typically, all sorts of quantitative information like market sizing and qualitative information like persona interviews make their way into the product. Early prototypes are often beta tested with feedback that's carefully collected and analyzed to help refine the final product. So in short, there's lots of data, especially external and market data, that drives new product development process. So now, instead of a new product, let's think about an existing product. Maybe it's one that's been around for a while. How do features get defined? How does the product management team prioritize the feature backlog? Well, unfortunately for a lot of product teams, it looks kind of like this. So instead of lots of market data, the primary influencers are particularly vocal salespeople and customers. And then various company leaders will also throw in their opinion. So the result is that features that benefit a particularly squeaky set of stakeholders get prioritized over things that might provide broader value to the majority of users. So instead of building something to address a market, you're actually building something to address one or two individual customers. Now, why does this matter? After all, it's not really a new product. Shouldn't you be prioritizing updates that serve your customers? And of course you should, but the problem is that you aren't necessarily serving the majority of your customers. Most users of your product will never contact you or provide feedback, yet this silent majority are the ones that you should really be building for. And there's additional risks to consider with a poor backlog prioritization. For example, incomplete solution delivery. When you ship a product, you never really wait until everything on the roadmap is built out before you first release. You're looking for the point where the product becomes viable, MVP, you can ship it, start to test. And that's when you ship the idea with the expectation that you'll add in other roadmap items for subsequent releases. However, without a good backlog, you can end up delaying key functions of your product and really not delivering against your product vision. So that brings me to the next one, which is a concern, which is missing broader market trends. A lot of the input that drives backlog prioritization can often be internally focused. This can lead the product management team's focus to move away from what's happening in the market. And teams that are inwardly focused may be too slow to react to emerging trends or disruptive competitors in the market. And finally, the final risk for this is as more and more one-off features are added into your product, there's no way to avoid added complexity and this idea of feature creep. Especially if many of the additions don't provide value for most of your users, products can end up with a UX that's cluttered, with mostly unused features, and become really difficult to use, especially for new customers who are just learning your product for the first time. But fortunately, there are some easy ways for product managers to get relevant information and bring it back into their backlog planning. Product managers who keep abreast of the market and competitive updates build products that customers need before they knew that they even wanted them. And it's easy to say that you should incorporate market data and trends into your backlog, but what does that really mean for a product manager? Well, first and foremost, it means that you need to pay attention to what's happening in the industry. Even things that might not be immediately relevant to your product, you need to start learning about. It's not really hard. Make sure that you're following industry news, key analysts and influencers. Understand what are they talking about? Are there things that you are building showing up in these conversations? If there's a huge disconnect between your internal discussions and the conversations happening in the marketplace, you may not be building the right things. So make it a point to read external news and articles just about every day. Also, capitalizing on trends is really important, even if it doesn't seem to address an immediate customer need. Implementing forward-looking features makes your product more exciting in the eyes of your customers and your prospects. It shows that you're not going to leave them behind, you have them in mind. And this is incredibly important for products that rely on reoccurring subscription revenue. Competitive insights are another important piece of data that product managers really need to pay attention to. Competitive positioning is really not just the job of the sales and marketing teams. What your competitors are building can tell you a lot about what's happening in the market. So as a product manager, you'll want to pay close attention to competitive announcements. So consider setting up alerts so as not to miss them. Bring up competitors in your customer meetings. Often multiple vendors will be installed in a single company, or at least they'll have evaluated multiple vendors prior to picking your solution. So just ask customers, they'll tell you a lot if you do. Also, stay close to your sales and success teams. Which competitors are they running into? You may be in competitive situations with vendors that you hadn't really considered. And you can learn a lot about your users and the problems that they're trying to solve by seeing who you run up against in the sales and renewals processes. Another important point is avoiding Me Too features. So your sales team will often highlight capabilities such like, if we only had X, then it would lead to this win. But playing catch up to competitors isn't really a market leading position. So rather than attempting to emulate your competitors, look for areas of differentiation. What can you build to uniquely solve the customer's problem in ways that your competitors really can't match? These are a lot more useful features to start to prioritize. And finally, the last thing, and probably the most important thing for new versus existing products, is usage data. As an existing product, you've got a wealth of information to be gained by how the product is currently used. So what features get used? Which ones don't? This can be really helpful when deciding what to build out next. Where do users appear to struggle? This can really help you identify the most important usability issues to address. Consider also running surveys directly in your product to collect feedback. This is one of the best ways to reach users who might not otherwise contact you. Users are most receptive to providing feedback when they are in the application, and in-app, unlike email surveys, it ensures that you're actually collecting feedback from your active users of your product. So that way you have feedback not just from your most vocal customers, but from a much more representative sample. So the last point that I want to make is, look at your Net Promoter or customer satisfaction scores if you have them, and overlay them with feature usage. Are there particular areas of your or features of your product that correlate to the most satisfaction? What are the happiest things what are the things that your happiest customers are doing? And these are probably the things that provide the most value and are good areas to prioritize as you build out new capabilities. So now I've gone through the risks of poor backlog management and some advantages of using data. I'm just going to hand it over to Jeff to talk about taming his backlog.
Thank you, Julie. So why do we choose the phrase taming your backlog? I think it's important for all of us to realize that even companies like Pendo, they're in product management, they sell to product managers. I think everyone on earth has a time when they look at their backlog and they see 80, 90, 100 epics, many of which aren't properly formulated. And it's important to know, how do you go in and you tame your backlog? How do you make sure that you're investing your time and resources in the appropriate initiatives or in the appropriate epics or stories? So whenever I take a look at why do you have a backlog in the first place, it's really to maximize efficiency. It's intended to ensure that individuals are spending their time and you're spending your money investing on the right things as quickly as you can to get them to market. It's about building relationships between teams. So you can think of your backlog as the formal relationship between your product team, who's typically speaking to the market and they're speaking to other stakeholders, and your development team, who may not always care about all that, and they just want to know, what exactly do you want me to build with clear requirements. It's also important to map out the future, showing where you're headed, not just from a business vision perspective, but also from a product perspective in a clear way that's prioritized. And it's really important to remember as you're managing your backlog, it's not something that you can just set once and then you give something a priority level of 8 out of 10 and it stays an 8 out of 10. Many of the things that Julie mentioned, like trends and competitive movement, they will continue to influence your backlog in numerous different ways. One of them is prioritization and importance. So you may look at something that, hey, this was an 8 last fall. Now it's second quarter of this year. What do we want to assign that in terms of importance? Next, please. So building the right thing, as Julie mentioned, is really hard to do. You have so many different stakeholders and points of view that are attempting to influence the future of your product. You think of it, you have customers asking for different features. As Julie mentioned, you have prospects that are saying, if you only had feature X, then we'll buy from you. And it's tough sometimes to say no to that revenue. You have salespeople who are the proxies for customers that are saying the same thing. Sales engineers who are maybe looking across a few customers and trying to influence your roadmap. Marketing, maybe looking out at trends. Business development talks about different alliances and partnerships that are possible. Your actual partners are saying like, hey, prioritize our integration and we'll open up this entirely new market for you. And then you have competitors, right? In today's world, as Julie mentioned, it's so easy to go out and see on TechCrunch or TechMeme or Hacker News where your competitors are making investments, and you're saying, do we need to go there as well to win customers? Also, how do you translate that data into insights? I think direct communication with customers is best. Like even as someone who focuses on UX, actually spending the time understanding what customers do, what they value, what their desired outcomes are is so critical. You can also use quantitative analysis tools like Pendo. One of my favorite things about Pendo is the fact that you're looking at real users who are actually in your app and what they're doing and what they need. And then, competitors, again, are your competitors out at trade show talking about where they're being successful, giving you more information. And then lastly, focusing on your customers' jobs to be done. This is a framework. You may have read the book Competing Against Luck recently. And there are also some older books from an author named Anthony Alwick, but just really stepping back and looking at what do my customers want to accomplish and how do I get them there, rather than just like, what are my customers asking me for and asking me about. Next, please. So prioritization is hard. So as was mentioned, I'm a cognitive psychologist, and I've actually done some research on the efficacy of checklists and how great they are and how they're so inexpensive. They're the lowest cost, highest effectiveness tool I can think of. And balanced scorecard is an old business idea, but I think it has a place here in product backlog management, where you can look at what's the potential return from this. Hopefully it's not just one customer, you're looking at a market. How does it influence CSAT, which should always be translated back into, is it retention, is it reducing churn? What's the level of investments that's needed? So it's important to have as part of your backlog process some sort of scoping, whether it's story points or t-shirt sizes, something that you can rely upon. Developers, I've noticed, also have a tendency to underestimate, whereas architects often overestimate. So make sure you're balancing that and you're understanding it over time, how accurate your estimates are. Relationships between items, really important. You may find that, hey, we're going after this particular theme, but we have these prerequisites. If we do these things first, then that makes this later project easier. And then also themes, again, you're looking for that, I think it's a business adage, 1 + 1 = 3, or a collection of items that make you more interesting to a particular niche or segment. Risk, so bandwidth, telecommunications, software. We often are engaged in situations that have legal implications, or the FCC is regulating something, so we need to look at risk sometimes from that perspective. Tech debt, so maybe you delivered a feature to meet a particular deadline and it hasn't necessarily passed all your reliability or security tests, and you need to go back and look at it. UX debt, so again, something went out quickly and now people are using it and it matters a lot more how great the user experience is, so does that have to come back into play? And also just thinking of a customer hierarchy of needs. So again, knowing your customer and understanding what they want to accomplish is so critical. And then you start to look at, okay, what's foundational for them? What are those must-be features? Are we delivering on those? And then where are those opportunities to differentiate, as Julie mentioned? Next, please. So a few observations from the real world of backlogs from I've seen from a few different companies. One is focus on simplifying your workflow, and checklists are one way to do this, but if you mapped out or you think through, this is how we make product backlog decisions at our company today. If you're drawing more than, say, 3 or 4 boxes and arrows at a high level, it's probably too complicated. You may have a process that's 100 steps if you break it out, like jobs to be done framework. I think it's 93 steps to make sure that you understand and prioritize potential for differentiation around desired outcomes. But at a high level, it should be very easy to understand who owns a particular process or part of the process, where your inputs are, and how you make decisions. And again, scorecards can really help with that. You could probably make a product backlog scorecard in 10 minutes if you just think through how do we typically evaluate the investments we make from a product perspective. Related to that, building better business cases for epics earlier is so important, where ideas are cheap, they're so easy to come up with. You can just look at a competitor and say like, oh my gosh, if we just implemented this Python SDK, then we could win the entire market. And it's so easy to just come up with this long list of things that are like that. And someone, typically a product manager, needs to be the one who says like, hey, that's just an idea. It's not even halfway baked. We need to make sure we're investing in what's the real business case here. Is there a customer opportunity? Is there a market opportunity associated with this? And that leads to the next point about giving people a reason that each story or initiative exists. because it works. So there's some interesting science here where even if you give someone a nonsensical reason for why to do something, you just say like, I'd like you to explain that to me because I want to understand, which is, you just said the same thing again. People are more likely to comply. But with backlog management, I think it's so crucial to really have that business case and then explain it to developers to say, this is why this is meaningful. It's not always so obvious to your development team why a feature that maybe seems mundane or doesn't seem that exciting is actually crucial to a key strategic account or a key segment. And then lastly, it's so important to focus on customers and value add, not internal processes. Jeff Bezos just released the latest shareholder letter at Amazon. And one of the things he said is, being customer obsessed is so important, and be wary of proxies, right? So you may have these processes where it could be surveys, it could be interviews. I think he calls out surveys in particular, all this quantitative data that's so important, but it needs a counterpoint of actually spending time in the real world with customers, field research, qualitative observations, and bringing all that together to have a whole person view of the customer. And then how can you use that to make the right decisions about your backlog prioritization? So with that, I think we're going to open it up to some questions from the audience.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeff. Thank you, Julie. Really great session here. As I said before, now's a great time. Head into that Q&A panel and post any questions you might have for the content, and we'll get through as many of them as we can. And I already see a few of them starting to trickle in, so thank you very much. So first question. We got a question here that says, do you have any guidelines on how much is too much for customer surveys? At some point, users feel annoyed with too many pointers in surveys. Is there a good rule of thumb? I think that's an excellent question. There is obviously always a balance between requesting feedback and overwhelming things. So
yeah, I mean, in my role as a technical account manager, we often were asked with that question with Pendo, and specifically, we have polls in our application, and people want to know, well, how often should I be sending polls? And we kind of turn that question around often and say, well, why are you collecting this information? Do you have a clear why of why you need that information, and is that reasoning clear to your customer? If it's clear and compelling for your customer, then the data collection that you'll be receiving is understood of why they need that collection. The other really important thing is really targeting your audience for that why. If, for instance, you're looking for some feedback on a particular set of features that are available in your application, you might not want to survey people who don't often use that aspect of your application. It's just not helpful to their day-to-day job, and they use other parts of your application. So really being targeted with your audience is super important so that you're never bombarding someone with useless data collection. It's always relevant to them.
Yeah, I think to build on that, the idea of the data collection can be useless. People sometimes ask me, how often should you user test? And I say as often as it's actionable, right? Mm-hmm. So there's no reason for you to conduct a large-scale survey of all these customers if you can't make any decisions or make any changes to what you're doing in that same time period. And then one of my favorite things, since I don't work for Pendo, we just happen to be located nearby. One of the best things about Pendo and tools like it is that it gives you insights into what people are actually doing in the application. So that can supplement the need to, say, survey everyone. And then become a great brand. Actually, I'd say this brand is better at user experience than any other brand in the world. And I'm not going to name them because I'm about to critique them. Is they conduct exit surveys when you leave their experience, and for all the extraordinary things that they do during the experience, the exit survey is 80 questions. And it's ridiculous. It makes no sense. And there's no way that all of those answers are actionable. I definitely prefer NPS or something that's really short and quick and gives me something that's insightful and meaningful that I can actually make design decisions off of. And I think you can easily combine NPS with the number scale with a qualitative question to go along with it. So it's something that's prescriptive.
Cool. Thanks, guys. All right, next question. And again, please keep them coming in. We'll get to as many of them as we can. So good question here. As a product manager, how do I start to get more data into our decision-making processes? How do I get a team to buy into changes? And that's actually really important, right? Because as a product manager, you're not operating by yourself. And honestly, the people you're trying to influence don't report to you. How do you push through a process to become more data-driven?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, on my most recent project, one of the most important things for getting a lot of buy-in into the data was having the engineers actually interact with the product and interact with customers to start to understand and gain empathy for what we were trying to do. Obviously, the data from the customers helped incite that decision of this project, but in early involvement of engineers and the design team to really engage with customers and feel their pain just made it super easy for them to really understand exactly why we were building what we were building.
Yeah, I think spending time with customers directly is so critical as a supplement to something that's more quantitative and ongoing. And it's been my experience, at least, that developers and engineers love data. So if you can provide them with quantitative reasons to do something instead of just this is what product thinks or executive X is in support of this, I think it can go a long way.
Okay, great. So next question here. Julie, you talked about the fact that data is pretty much regularly used when building a new product, but where is the room for intuition? Obviously, the famous example of Steve Jobs and the iPad and refusing to do any market research. Where do you draw that line as a product manager?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways. So when you're talking about new products, I think there's a lot of intuition there. I mean, a lot of great product managers do have amazing ideas and kind of have that forethought into the market. But I think there's still data that's introduced throughout the testing and validation process. That's still necessary to help understand, is this just me or is this catching on to others? So I think that validation is still data. It's still helping you refine what the understanding of the product might be. And I also think it's at the, what level are we talking? Are we talking about the big project or the little decisions? The minute decisions, I'd say, are definitely a lot of intuition. Oftentimes, you don't want to hop on the phone every single time you have to make any sort of decision. But it's all about that discretion of, is this something that I'm going to be able to tweak or refine based on feedback as I gain it and as it comes out, or is this something that I need to get that data up front and make sure I'm heading in the right direction?
Yeah, I think that the Steve Jobs story is an important one for trusting your gut or trusting your intuition. But intuition that is not previously formed by data and feedback is just air. It doesn't matter. Like when you think of, and I hate to mention him because he's a scientific journalist who I really respect, but he didn't do any of the research that he reports on. But if you look at Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink, and the thoughts on intuition there is, it's really just expertise. And you've gone through all these situations. Say you're a firefighter and you walk into a building, you're like, that wall is going to collapse. It's not just magic. It's actually informed by the fact that you know a tremendous amount about fire and you've had all these experiences. And in previous situations that feel like that, that wall has collapsed or a wall has collapsed unexpectedly to other people, and So I think Steve Jobs and what many leaders can do is they are maniacally focused on solving a problem that matters to them, and they're informed by spending time in the real world and saying, like, personal computers could be beautiful. And Xpark has this great graphical user interface. I'm going to take that and use it on my own systems. And that's going to matter to people because we want to make computing more accessible to people. So I think he derived his intuition from those real world experiences. Maybe he didn't conduct focus groups at Apple, but he's still drawing on real world insight to make decisions.
I think that's a great point. So both of you talked about the challenge in the backlog dealing with sort of one-off requests from sellers or from particularly vocal customers. What's the best way as a product manager to push back against those?
Yeah. So that's I think it's an extremely challenging problem in a way because the best product managers have excellent relationships with salespeople who are the front line. Often, in many companies, they're the most important people in the company, right? Because they help everyone's checks get paid, and they're the ones who drive the value of the business. And oftentimes, they are told by a customer, if you have feature X or feature Y or can make this cut to the price or something, then you can close this deal. And I think it's important for product to realize that, you know, our role is stepping back from that situation and saying, what's good for the business longer term? How can we look at the vision, strategy, and the themes of the future of the product and make the right decision based on that? And the salesperson is advocating maybe for something that helps them retire quota for that month or that year, and product's job is to step back. So I think when a salesperson comes to you, it's important to ask, you know, what does the customer want to accomplish? Make sure you really understand their desired outcome and their goal. And is what they're asking for even the best way to solve that problem? And I think oftentimes it's not. Customers have a point of view, and a company like Bandwidth or like Pendo, we have a much broader point of view than many of our customers because we're experts in a particular space. So I think stepping back, what do you want to accomplish, desired outcome, goal, and then coming back with a solution that makes sense, maybe not just for that customer, but also for the target segment.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I think one of the major initiatives that we've actually taken with our success and sales teams more recently is training around developing user stories. So when you're collecting this information from a customer or a prospect, really digging deeper to actually articulate the why behind it, and not just kind of building that checklist of, you know, customer X wants Y. It's more about what they're trying to achieve. And once you build that story, it means the product manager is a lot more informed in order to make that decision. And the only other thing I would add is that it's really helpful. We're big on transparency here. It's really helpful for that to be almost a collaborative discussion. It's, you know, the salesperson might even have the ability to look into the backlog and see what there is, and, you know, let's talk about where this fits within our current backlog. What else is going to go? You know, we have a finite set of resources, and we have to best allocate and prioritize for those things that do affect the business, as you're saying, Jeff.
I think Julie's onto something really important with the idea as in B2B sales today. I think salespeople are often asked to be researchers in a way, where it's you aren't just the relay point for what someone asked you for. You can ask them why. And one of my favorite things about that question is it's the easiest methodology you can describe to someone else. Just ask them why, like a little kid, or like Toyota's 5 whys, right? And then when you get closer to those root causes, it can tease out what really matters to the customer. And then that information can be used to not only inform your product backlog, but also your marketing collateral and other decisions you make.
Cool. So I think this is in response to your point about designing sort of forward-looking features, Julie. Is there a line somewhere where between sort of creating a feature for, let's call it marketing purposes, versus just really focusing on something that delivers value to customers? And what would you prioritize one over the other?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would probably distill this question into very simply, you know, you should always be building valuable things. You should always be adding value. So I think there may become a time when two valuable products or feature sets, one may be a little bit sexier to the market and one may be a little less so. And in that case, if they're both providing value, then sure, let's also sell to the market. But I really do feel that fundamentally nothing should be built if it doesn't provide value.
Yep, I agree. I almost don't understand the question in a way. Like there should be a focus on value with whatever you're doing. I guarantee if you're a company that cares passionately about your customers and their problems, you'll always be able to find things that can fill your backlog that are valuable to them, and not just one of them, but to many of them.
Cool. So going along those lines, I think to one of your points about competitors, is there ever a case where you'd want to copy something a competitor does? It seems like this is actually something that in the software industry happens all the time.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I think if you're Facebook and their Instagram, then you may want to copy them because they've proven out the value of a feature, and you're gigantic and extremely important to the world because you connect billions of people. You're like, hey, if we had that feature, it'd be great. And it's almost I think, unfortunately, in software, other companies that are smaller can oftentimes become almost market research firms for these larger companies that have infinite resources, right? So if Google, Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, these extraordinary companies that are large see smaller companies gaining traction by delivering a particular feature or product, it's easy for them to say, like, hey, we're going to integrate that into our suite. Oh, Slack has that? Great. Pendo has that. Great.
Yeah, an interesting observation that we've actually made more recently is around like certain personas having acceptance criteria for products that are based on checklists. It's almost, you get to that level where there's procurement and there's a certain set of standards that really must be there in order for us to get over the barrier of being accepted. And I think, in those cases, obviously it is valuable to a broad market. It is a checklist item that is widely accepted. And in those cases, it makes absolute sense to incorporate and so say copy that part of the product into your, as long as it's been tested, as you said, it's already proven to work.
Yeah, I think you're onto a great point where you may notice a competitor has a tremendous amount of success in a particular segment. And upon further investigation or analyzing your win-loss reports, it may be you just don't have a certain security certification. It's just never been something your company invested in. And that's at some point procurement at that B2B is like, hey, we cannot let this vendor pass this test. And you may have to invest in something basically because a competitor has it. So it makes sense to me.
Good. All right. This looks like the last question that's come in. So if you've got a question, while we're answering it, go ahead and put it in. But otherwise, we'll wrap with this one. And the question is, my team and I have a huge backlog already. How can we best move forward from where we are, kind of following best practices? And it seems like a lot of what you talked about could be applied to an existing backlog.
Yeah, I think this is a problem, right? In any company that's innovative and or inventive, you always have more ideas than you can build. It happens. I'm sure Pendo does an excellent job curating its backlog, but I guarantee the people that are in this building have more ideas than you guys can build in a quarter or a year. So it is important. I think most important, stay close to the customer so you understand what's current. And there's a gentleman, he wrote a book called Hidden in Plain Sight. His name's Jan Chipchase. He is an extraordinary field researcher. And something that he said about data has always stuck with me about how it's best consumed fresh. So I think if you assign someone who's responsible for making sure that you're prioritizing your backlog, this is probably your product manager, that's making sure that it's prioritized based on the most current, fresh data you have about what's important, not the data that you had when you threw in the backlog 4 months ago or 6 months ago. I think that's especially important for companies in very fast-moving industries like Pendo is, where you need to be looking at what are our customers, what's important to them, what are their jobs to be done, what are their desired outcomes as of last week, because many of your customers are moving around a little bit. So I think fresh data and clear ownership are so critical for that.
Yeah. I was talking about this with my team actually, and one of the things is, just focus. We have a couple of important swim lanes where we know that we're prioritizing these sets of initiatives, and the features that are falling to the top of the list in our backlog are how well do they align with those? Are we remaining focused based on the most relevant information from our customers, from the market? So I would say that it comes down to focus, maybe grouping some items that have kind of a story to tell. They may be separately entered from a variety of ways into the backlog, but how can you consolidate them into a larger objective that maybe meets one of those initiatives that is most relevant to the day?
Yeah, I think you're onto something important with tying it into a larger objective. So part of prioritization, I don't think it should be just these things have the best ratio between, or the best ROI, or the best ratio between importance and investment level. It should be more about looking at your entire portfolio of investment as a company and then understanding what you can deliver against those different areas of investment that make something that matters more than any individual epic would on its own. And again, one way to do that is through a checklist or scorecard. And I think having a standardized procedure for making those decisions instantly makes them much more transparent and helps people buy into them so much more. Like, here are the real reasons that we're doing this. It's not just because Julie's a really compelling person, or executive A talked to customer B and customer B said, do it. Because I'll tell you where that doesn't fly in many companies is engineering or development. Like, why are we doing this? That's such an important question to answer. And it's great to have, here's our process. You can review it in 10 minutes. It's so easy to understand. And then here are the 6 criteria that really matter to our customer or to us today. And this is how we evaluate it and the decisions we make. And give people an opportunity to be part of that process, but also have clear accountability and ownership on who runs it, because that keeps it fast. Not every person in the building should have a vote necessarily on what your product backlog looks like. They should maybe have the opportunity to comment on it, or to say, like, hey, this is maybe taking us down a path we shouldn't be in, or like, I think this is more important. I'm sales, I talk to customers all the time, this is what they say. But really, someone needs to be accountable for that ownership of, I own the future, I own our themes, I own our roadmap that faces customers, I own our internal roadmap, I own our backlog, I own the way that this product ties to our strategy. And I think if you have, again, clear criteria for that, then it's very easy to prioritize a backlog. And also that keeps your decision making fast. If all you do is argue about a backlog, you never actually build anything.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. I think that's a wonderful note to close on. And with that, we'll say thanks everyone for joining us today. Really appreciate all that stayed in. Appreciate all the questions from the audience. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks.